Well, good morning, Lloyd. Today we're going to be talking with a wonderful expert on cyber risk, and that's Jody Westby. And I think we've had her on years before, so we're thrilled to have her on again. And she's going to be talking about the gap between privacy and cyber risk, which is really a scary thing right now in our society and really all over the world. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her, and then I'm going to have her tell us a little bit more. But basically, she's an attorney. She has over 20 years of she's a techie, legal, policy, and business experience. And she actually is an adjunct professor at the Georgia Institute of Technology School of Computer Science. And she's a professional blogger for Forbes. And she's here with us. And so we're so glad, Jody. I want to just give your website, which is globalcyberrisk.com. And you can also go to our website at privacypiracy.org. And we link to her website. You'll see her picture and her bio, and we link there. But tell me, Jody, how did you become such a techie, and how did you get into this field?
I started my career back farther than I want to say.
Okay.
And I spent 10 years in the computer industry.
Hmm.
And at that time, there was a lot of big mainframes, but they were moving to the smaller unbundled systems and databases. And so I actually worked in my career doing everything from operations to programming to systems analysis and then database administration. And my last two big companies I was with was Williams Companies and then American Airlines. So then I became an attorney and practiced law with a couple New York firms. And then I went to a think tank. And in between that, I went to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and headed up domestic policy. Well, the internet came around, and I started doing all those internet issues and national security issues. And then I went to a think tank and was head of the IT studies program, but it was a think tank devoted to what they called the digital revolution. And then I was tapped to launch a company that many of the people in California have heard more than back here, called In-Q-Tel, which was founded and funded by the CIA. And it was a mini venture capital IT solutions company. The mission is to find unclassified commercial solutions to our intelligence community's most pressing technology problems. So I just had this blend of technical, legal, policy, business process experience, and ended up saying in 2000, I'm going to start my own business. This all is coming together. And so that's what I did. And for the last, well, at least since 2005, that's when I changed my company name to Global Cyber Risk. We've been doing cyber risk assessments and incident response planning. We do a lot of privacy compliance. We've done privacy impact assessments, cyber governance, inventories, data mapping, all that to help people. And I prefer it actually when you know what women do so well too, is we connect our dots. So I connected the dots, and I prefer to actually work on the consulting side, but I'm very active in the American Bar Association. And so we always look at all the compliance aspects. So we really kind of weave it together.
That's incredible. And it's such a great blend too, especially nowadays. So when you're talking about the gap between privacy and cybersecurity, help us understand what that all means.
Well, there are very few attorneys that have this kind of technology background. Those that have a technology background are mainly patent people.
Right.
And so the privacy community, and I'm using generalizations here, so please, the audience, understand that this is an area where I'm talking in generalities today. But the privacy community is largely comprised of a lot of compliance people. And they're people that are very smart in the law and understanding policy and compliance requirements, but they are not usually, don't have much of a background in technology.
Right.
So they really don't understand the cybersecurity programs and the system architectures of the systems they're working with.
Right. And that's where you bring that wonderful expertise and experience. So let's talk about, you know, a lot of the chief privacy officers, a lot of companies have been hiring chief privacy officers and chief security officers. And one of my friends wears both hats, Patty
Mhm.
Titus, who you may know.
Yeah.
So what has that done? Has that improved the situation, or what's going on with that?
Well, so this is a really interesting topic. And, for years I did these governance studies on how boards and senior executives are governing privacy and security. And we always looked at the roles and responsibilities. There's been a lot of movement. Like, we moved from the audit committee being in charge of cybersecurity really to now risk committees.
Yeah.
But we can't seem to get rid of this thing where the CISO reports to the CIO. And we can't seem to get rid of the urge of companies to throw privacy and security all in one person. But it's an obvious segregation of duties issue.
Yeah.
And if you have these in two separate roles, and I had a client where this happened, he was both. And there was a clear compliance issue they had. He didn't think they had it. Even his security team thought they did, but because he was both privacy and security, the conversation didn't take place. So one thing that is happening is that at the high level, at the board and executive level, yes, they're hiring chief privacy officers because they kind of we need a privacy officer and we need a privacy policy. And so we check that box, we hire someone, and then they sort of put that away. And those people have been toiling away in organizations doing their privacy policy and trying to manage privacy risks, but they have never really been connected with the IT team. Once in a while, like when I go to these privacy conferences in a talk, someone will say, well, and you really ought to go talk to the IT team too. You ought to go talk to the IT people.
Yeah.
Yeah, every day. So the roles and responsibilities are part of the problem here, in that it hasn't integrated privacy and security people together where they're as a team. Right now, they're not even hardly talking to each other. And that's the real gap.
And sometimes they almost, not only do they not talk to each other, but they're really at odds with each other, just like with the marketing department. So what do you do in your particular program and in your company to bring them together? What are the things that you do?
Well, because I'm an attorney and because I have a technical background, we can talk in both worlds, and we bring CIOs and CPOs together, but we also bring in the risk managers, those people in large companies who are buying the insurance. And we help connect the dots in an organization. One thing that a company should have, if it's doing things properly with privacy and security, not one or the other, is a cross-organizational team that looks at privacy and security issues. And this is senior level people across the organization that meets at least quarterly and discusses privacy and security issues, because they are business issues that flow across a company.
Right.
And so if those organizational teams were there, that would be helpful. But what we do is really, in doing cyber risk assessments or whatever we're assisting a client with, we try to gently bring the people together, and then they start understanding, this isn't a threat to me. These people are trying to help me. And now with the threat environment the way it is, people are understanding they don't want all of this responsibility on them because they get fired if something happens. And by best practices, risk needs to be spread across the organization, and the business owners need to be responsible for their systems and data. So trying to help the client understand, this is a company problem and we need to work on this as a team, and we need to come together. And then they also start going, ding, 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 we can pool our money. I can get money for what I need from they need this, I need this,
Yeah.
let's pool our money. And so it works, but you just we try to play a facilitating role, and usually quite successfully, actually.
So tell me a little bit about how you perform cybersecurity risk. We have companies that are driving by that aren't really large companies that have a lot of money to spend on this.
Yeah.
So what are some things that they can do maybe can they even hire a company like yours if they're a smaller company? I know it gets very expensive. Or what are some tips that you have for all of the companies that are driving by? Because we have like a little area that's a technology area right here in Orange County in Aliso Viejo with lots of tech companies. And a lot of them are new,
Right.
up and coming. So what can they do?
Well, it's for the small and mid-sized business market. And SMB means revenues up to 1 billion. So this is much bigger than we used to think about.
Yeah.
But many of them now have mandatory requirements for risk assessments. Many of them have mandatory requirements for privacy impact assessments. Many of them have mandatory requirements for pre-breach cybersecurity programs, where the breach notification laws are saying you have to have all of these things in place just in case an event would happen. And
Right.
there's now about 23 or 24 states that have those. So the first thing a small business has to do is to sit back and say, well, I may be small, but what are my compliance requirements? The second thing they can do is to have, to have an insurance policy for cyber. That helps because these events are expensive. However, the biggest risk right now is for small and mid-sized businesses to understand buying a cyber policy doesn't mean you're going to stay in business, because the attackers are hitting small and mid-sized businesses. Mid-size has gone up 100%, small businesses 200%. So a small mid-sized business needs to know, first of all, what are my requirements? Do I need a risk assessment? Do I need to have a privacy impact assessment? What are the things I have to do? Do I need to file things annually? The next thing is to then get a security program stood up that makes sense for what you're doing. And the two most important things are a risk assessment and an incident response plan. If you don't have an incident response plan, you're going to be flying by the seat of your pants, and it's not going to be pretty.
Right.
And if you haven't done a risk assessment, you really don't know what you need to do. And whenever you have an incident, if you can show that you've had an assessment and you're trying to improve things, no one expects you to be perfect. There's a lot of forgiveness. But if you haven't ever done a risk assessment and you're just out there operating business, your investors, whether they're family and friends or you're a big company on a public exchange, are not going to be happy, and regulators are not going to be happy. So we have modified, I've streamlined my methodologies I used for large multinationals so I can do a risk assessment, an incident response plan for an SMB, and do it in a cost-effective manner, and one that is also very comprehensive and gets them a really good work product. Now, a lot of people do these all different ways, but the main thing to understand is that companies can't just sit around and wait, and they can't think their IT guy is going to also be their security guy. They have to start focusing on this, and the small mid-sized businesses often don't want to spend the money.
Right.
But let me tell you, they're going to spend a lot of money the minute something happens, and then it's not going to be good for their operations. They may not even stay in business.
Right. And they may be fined by the Attorney General's office or by the Federal Trade Commission or whatever, right? Depending on how bad of a breach it was or whatever they did.
They can lose customers, they can lose market share.
Right. And the publicity is not going to be great for them either. Right. Right. Okay. So in terms of the consequences of the gap, what is going to happen? Well, I guess that's what we were just talking about too, is those are some of the consequences of having the gap, is that it just doesn't get done. When you say, you're an attorney and I'm an attorney, and I notice that law firms are probably the worst offenders as far as privacy is concerned. What do you say about that? I mean, I can't even believe when I send something encrypted and, I give them the password, just even make it something simple. A lot of these attorneys will send me things like tax returns unencrypted. And what do you say to that? I mean, I think people are just kind of in smaller firms or even larger firms. They're just oblivious. So what do you think about that?
There are tools now that are out there to help companies send confidential information securely, because that is a bigger problem than it sounds like. Encryption has never taken hold very well, except maybe this laptop hard disk encryption because it's difficult to use and you have encryption keys to manage and all of that. But there are some solutions now that are
The
making
vaults,
it easier, and and that has to be there. There's also policies and procedures, and you can say to your accountant, do not send this to me by email unless it's encrypted, or please use, we have a technology to send it. I want to send you the link so you can send it to me via that means.
right.
And letting your people that you work with and deal with know that this is important for you if they want to keep you as a client.
Right. Well, if they're the opposing counsel, or if they're an attorney, if I'm the mediator and they're all the attorneys and they're sending me stuff, and I'm telling them, please encrypt, or please send it through a secure vault or whatever. I don't get. I mean, they just ignore that. So that's pretty amazing in that field, and the accountants too. I've changed 3 accountants because they did not keep things private. So it just is crazy.
Well, but there's one thing, if you don't mind, I'd like to bring up here, and that is that the privacy people, we're back to this thing of the privacy people and the security people don't talk a lot, but part of it is the privacy people are off. They don't understand cybersecurity programs.
Right.
They have gone to ISO and NIST and said, oh, we need our own standards. And so ISO has developed, some standards that for privacy. And I have to say, ISO has developed several of them. So they have 27001 and 27002 are the leading information security and control documents. But then they have 27701, that is a privacy document for its security techniques. Maybe you can see it as security techniques, and it's an extension to 27001 and 27002 for privacy information management. And they have they have a document for security for clouds and security for privacy impact assessments, guidelines for how you do that. They have 5 or 6 publications, but they have done this very different than NIST. NIST just this past month came out with their privacy framework, and it's a nightmare.
Okay.
ISO has taken the privacy requirements and linked them to the cybersecurity program. And this is what has been the gap all along. Privacy officers don't understand cybersecurity programs.
No.
They don't know how to take my privacy compliance requirement and turn that into 3 or 4 controls over here in the cybersecurity program. And ISO has done a very good job at identifying, here are the things you need to do for good privacy management, and here's how this is linked to and integrated into the standards for cybersecurity programs. NIST has just created this document that is the biggest bunch of blah blah, and these people going around redundantly developing things that are already done in the cybersecurity program. They're not even aware of it. It is the document that I just hung my head and said, oh dear. We used to have NIST developing great stuff, but this document is a mess, and it is simply because it was developed by people who don't understand cybersecurity programs and how to do it. The ISO documents were developed by people that understand GDPR. They're mainly Europeans. They have a lot of stakeholders involved around the world.
And they've had privacy around a lot longer than us, too.
Yep, and they have taken it very seriously. But, the privacy impact assessments and the requirements, those came from across the pond.
Right.
And so when I look at the 2 documents, there is such a big difference between them. And it worries me because until our privacy officers grasp how to integrate this in cybersecurity programs, we are going to continue to waste money and to not have good privacy protections. They'll have developed a lot of good paperwork, but it doesn't mean it's going to mean anything.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy. So this all leads to the issue of education and training. So what do you think should happen so that these kinds of, that gap is closed and there's that integration and understanding?
Um,
It's a tough one.
I'm sorry to say this, but I think IAPP is part of the problem. And I love that
For
organization.
just my audience, the IAPP is the International Association of Privacy Professionals, of which, Jody and I are both members. So
Yeah, members.
I
And
just,
they came out with this document, the skill set needed to implement a privacy risk management framework. And they're saying how, oh, this is how you take our best practices and use the NIST framework.
oh dear.
I'm going, good. Well, that's not going to get anything in a security program. And so it has been a frustration of mine. I mean, I've gone to several privacy events in the past year and have left so frustrated. I was at one event and they had a big round table and said, let's go around the room and talk about what do you think has been the most important thing since, what surprised you the most since GDPR? And they came to me and I said that no one's talking about, the EU cybersecurity mandates. And they just looked at me and went, next. And so there's a big gap here. And I think it's just a gap between compliance and technical people. And I don't think IAPP's done enough to help bridge that. I don't think IAPP understands it. And I'm so sorry to say that because I love the organization. They've done, Trevor and all of them have done a great job. They do great work. But I also think it's my responsibility as a professional and expert in this space to speak up when I see a big problem.
Yeah. Well, maybe you should get on their board.
Well, I probably don't want that.
You don't have enough to do, right, with your company.
Well, we don't want that, but I think we do need to have more conversations with them, and I'll take that on my back and say, maybe we should have been talking to them more than we have been.
Yeah. So, with the GDPR, we've got in California, the new California Consumer Privacy Act. So that's requiring a lot more. What do you think about that? I mean, we're going to have complete that gap for that law too, right?
Yeah. So, comparing GDPR and CCPA is a good comparison because the GDPR was discussed for years until it finally came about. But when it came about, it was well honed and refined.
Right.
CCPA was passed in a flash.
Well, you know why? Because it was an initiative, and what happened was the legislature didn't want it to be an initiative because they wouldn't be able to make any changes. So that's why they passed it in a flash, knowing that they could just work on it for years afterwards. So that's kind of California initiative process. Yeah,
but that costs everybody money when they're doing the process, and then they've already amended it. And then they put out regs. Now they've just amended some of the regs. And so, this is not helpful because right now it's out there and they've delayed the effective date. Well, it's effective, but the enforcement date. And it's created a lot of confusion. But, these things are expensive.
Yeah.
What people don't understand is when you start saying to a company, you have to be able to tell us all the information you have, and you have to be able to give a person a choice, and they have to be able to do this and this. This requires changes in software. These are system integration changes, and these are expensive. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars sometimes. And so companies need to know what they're doing. They just can't go in and make some change. Oh, well, now they've amended it. Let's go back and make another change to the system. All of this is a big process of what's the change going to be, change management process, development, testing, sign off, implementation, and
training. If people don't know how to use the software and they don't know how to integrate everything, then like you said, there's a gap, but the gap is they don't understand each other. The cyber people don't understand the privacy people, and then they're talking two different languages as well, right?
Well, and there's
at least you speak both languages. You can translate.
There's two different hammers. With GDPR, everyone was afraid of that 2 to 4% of global revenue.
Right.
With CCPA, they're not afraid of the fine. They're afraid of the civil lawsuits.
Right.
That could be filed.
Right.
And that's very different. The plaintiff's bar versus regulatory fines. And so we're going to see these play out very differently. It's going to be hard to compare them because the plaintiff's bar is going to run away with CCPA.
If they could understand it.
Doesn't matter if they do or not. They'll file lawsuits anyway.
Right, right. Yeah, I don't know if you know, but Alistar is proposing a new initiative now, another privacy initiative. So it
No.
should be interesting. Yeah, I've had him on my show, and he's actually coming back on again to talk about his new initiative. So, I mean, he has good ideas, but again, it's that gap. He doesn't understand either about how do you implement all this and what is that going to mean. So I think he looks for what he believes is right and gets the initiative going, but then to implement it is a whole nother story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Back to your whole thing though about
Training.
just the whole thing with what small and mid-sized businesses.
Yes.
Companies don't get on this and start taking privacy and cybersecurity seriously, they are going to be mandated to do stuff, and it's going to be an everyday cost that they have to live with forever.
Yeah.
It's going to happen. The lawmakers are just going to say, enough. We've given everybody enough time for market forces to work. You guys just aren't going to do this unless we tell you have to.
Right. So are there a couple guides that you can first refer people to read up on it that are in those mid-sized businesses that are driving by, and maybe the mid-sized law firms that don't know what they're doing either? For companies that can't hire their own CSO or CPO, which even those are having a problem according to what you're telling us. But what kind of guides can they start with? Should they start with best practice guides from the Federal Trade Commission, or what do you think is a good place to start?
There's a number of resources now. The Federal Trade Commission has put together a whole library of small business cybersecurity information. Good stuff. And I believe the Small Business Administration may have too, but the American Bar Association has too. So I'm serving on the ABA President's Cybersecurity Legal Task Force. And we've been putting together information and things for small businesses to look to. And so there's certainly, we can say, look to the NIST guidance, but
no, you don't want them to do that.
So I would say, if you look at the ISO 27001 and 2, and because that's the gold standard for cybersecurity programs, and those they're reasonable in size, and people can adapt them to their own organization. If they don't need something, they can say, I don't need this, and here's why, and go on.
Right.
And it's something that people can understand. And then look at the privacy documents that ISO has developed, especially this 27701. And yes, you have to pay for these, but they're not that much. It's like 158 Swiss francs, whatever that is. Maybe it's $150, but this is a document that you can use forever in your business. And look at that, because this really tells you, here's how you take this compliance requirement and make sure it's in your security program. And it's well written, and they link it all back to each requirement. And I actually think those are the best things for small and mid-sized businesses to look at, because it tells them what they really need to do. But even that, they don't understand the jargon and so in part, it's like, spend a little money, get somebody to come in. Don't just hire the IT guy, get a cyber person to come in, somebody that works with small and mid-sized businesses, and get a few bids and get someone to help you get going. I think that's really the smartest thing.
Well, that sounds great. That's a perfect way for us to end. Well, thank you, Jody, so much for your wisdom and all of the enlightenment and insights with what's going on with this gap, and hopefully with your speaking up at IAPP and other places that we will kind of close that gap and have a mutual understanding of what we can do to integrate privacy and cybersecurity so we're all protected, and so we can protect our businesses as well. So thank you for joining us, and we'll have you back again. Just give your website if you could.
It's globalcyberrisk.com. So
Okay.
that's easy.
Okay,
Thank
Jody.
you very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you. Bye bye.